Is it possible to learn a language just by playing video games? Learning a new language is exciting, but it can also be a daunting process. Beyond the linguistic aspects, we need to become familiar with a new way of thinking, understand a different culture, and in some occasions we even have to learn a new writing system. When choosing to learn a new language, most decide to do it the traditional way. Go to lessons, study grammar and vocabulary, practice with Duolingo. However, after a while, this can become demotivating due to being too repetitive and tiring. As a language teacher, I believe motivation is key for success, and playing video games is a very easy way to stay engaged. However, as much fun as video games are, I always had my doubts about how effective playing would be in the process of learning a foreign language. So I decided to challenge myself. How much of a language will I be able to learn just by playing a video game? To test this, the first thing I needed to do was decide which language to learn and which game to play. I wanted to focus more on playing rather than on studying, so I chose Italian, a language that is very similar to Spanish, but that I had never studied before. Doing this, my gaming experience wouldn't be constantly interrupted, since I wouldn't need to stop every time to understand what the characters were saying. Finding the right game turned out to be more complicated than expected, but after doing some research, I decided to go with Zelda: Breath of the Wild. This is an extremely popular game that I have never played before, and it's incredible for exposing yourself to a new language. It contains many cutscenes that talk about events happening in the story, frequent interactions with other characters, quest descriptions, and plenty of objects to collect that provide useful vocabulary such as clothes, animals, or food. I know there is a sequel to this game with more developed graphics and mechanics, but since this was my first time playing the franchise, I opted to start with Breath of the Wild. Sorry to interrupt, but before I continue, I would appreciate if you can take a second to like the video and subscribe to my channel. The YouTube algorithm can be tough, so by doing this you will help share this video with more people and let me know you're enjoying my content. Back to the video. Once everything was ready, I started playing the game. I can understand why this game is so popular. The attention to detail is incredible, and I love how the game allows you to play in many different styles. However, after playing for 10 hours, I encountered my first obstacle on my language learning process. As much as I was enjoying the game, I was struggling to understand the conversations between characters and what the quest required. I also noticed that I wasn't retaining words that looked different from Spanish and that many Italian words are not as similar to Spanish as I expected. Not only that, but there is almost identical words in both languages that have totally different meanings. Like burro in Spanish means donkey, but in Italian is butter?
Why?
Anyway, back to the topic. After realizing my initial strategy was not very effective, I changed my plan. I decided that every day after playing, I would write down the vocabulary, expressions, and grammar that I learned that day. Then, whenever I had free time, I would revise them. I continued playing for some more weeks and finished the main story and a large part of the post-game content. Now, before I explain my results, keep in mind my objective was not to acquire a good level of Italian. Learning a language is a tough process that requires much more time than I spent on this. My goal was to share my experience with you, understand the pros and cons, and give you my advice from a language teacher perspective on how you can get the most out of it. With that said, here are the results of my experience. Overall, I ended up playing Zelda for over 100 hours. However, this number doesn't include the time I spent creating and revising the vocabulary document. Regarding the positives, this method is very useful for building receptive knowledge. This term refers to the ability to understand a language, whether it's spoken or written, without necessarily being able to produce it. In my case, I was able to get a grasp of how Italian works and become familiar with its vocabulary. The video game frequently exposed me to new words, many of which were often repeated. After a while, I was able to recognize those words quickly, but oftentimes I couldn't recall them when I was not playing the game. I also noticed that I started to perceive basic grammar aspects of the language that are different from my native language, such as the gender of words or the order of possessives. But the skill in which I noticed the most improvement was reading. I noticed two big changes with this skill. The more I played, the fewer sentences I needed to translate, and the faster I was able to read. During the last times I played, I hardly needed to look up anything in the dictionary, which made the experience much smoother. On the other hand, and unfortunately, I also noticed several disadvantages. The main one was related to surprise productive knowledge, which is the opposite of receptive knowledge. Basically, I was not required to produce language, either spoken or written, at any time of the game. I had trouble recalling vocabulary, and for the words I remembered, I wasn't sure how to spell them or pronounce them. Communication is the end goal of learning a foreign language, so not being able to speak or write is actually a huge drawback. I was also expecting to improve my listening skills more, but I noticed that the amount of exposure was minimal. Most conversations are not voiced, so I could only practice this skill during the scenes that introduce different parts of the story. In conclusion, playing video games can be a very effective tool on your language learning process, but I would say that it works better as a reinforcement than as a main source of learning. Combine it with taking lessons and talking to people, and you will not only maximize its advantages, but you will also be able to enjoy games that you are playing even more. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure to watch more of my content, like this other video where I prepared a surprise escape room for my students. I'll see you in the next video!